Hello there, my name's Mr Drayton. I'm a comedian and presenter and sometimes do a bit of daft magic, and I do a lot of mucking about, and I'm going to read you a little chapter from a book called Wayside School is Falling Down by Louis Sachar. Now, I'd like to explain how I discovered Louis Sachar in the first place. I was in a bookshop and I found this book, which is Holes by Louis Sachar, which has now become famous, become a film and a stage play. But it wasn't the words in the book that attracted me to it when I first saw it. It was the holes in the cover. If you can see, there's some holes there. Let me demonstrate with the aid of a feather. There we are. Look, there's holes. Look at that. How many books can you pull a feather through the cover? Not many, and there's some in the back. It's great, actually. It's really good. It's a good idea to have holes in a book, unless it's a book about water. And then you would just have wet trousers, wouldn't you? Anyway, I digress. Wayside School is a series of books that I read to my daughter when she was little, and I just loved reading them to her. So I thought I would bring you one of the stories. Thing you need to know about Wayside School is it's not a conventional school. It's a bit daft. It's a bit zany. And each class is stood on each class. So there's 30 classes in a big class tower. And one of the classes is Mrs Jewls' class, where this story takes place. So this is chapter 3 in Wayside School is Falling Down by Louis Sachar, and it's called Beebe's Baby Brother. Buckle in, kids. We're going on a journey. Mrs Jewls asked Damien to pass back the homework. Beebe Gunn waited nervously. Except for art, her grades had not been very good lately. If she didn't start bringing home good grades, her parents wouldn't let her stay up past midnight, and she did her best work past midnight. Damien handed Calvin his homework, then Todd, then Joy. "Where's yours?" asked Calvin. "I don't know," said Beebe. "Did you do it?" asked Calvin. "Yes, I did," said Beebe. "I worked extra hard on it. I hope Mrs Jewls hasn't lost it." Damien finished passing out the homework. Beebe never got hers. "Beebe, will you come here, please?" said Mrs Jewls. She pushed out of her seat, stood up and nervously walked to Mrs Jewls' desk. "I really did my homework, Mrs Jewls," she said. "Really?" "Yes, I know," said Mrs Jewls. And she held Beebe's homework in her hand. "Whew!" Beebe sighed with relief. "I'd afraid you'd lost it." "No, I didn't lose it," Mrs Jewls said sternly. She showed the back of the paper to Beebe. Someone had written, "Mrs Jewls is as fat as a hippopotamus and she smells like one too." "I didn't write that," exclaimed Beebe. "I love the way you smell." Mrs Jewls smiled. "But if you didn't write it, who did?" "Ray," Beebe instantly replied. "Who's Ray?" "He's my little brother, Ray Gunn. He must have snuck into my room after I was asleep. He's always playing mean tricks on me. He knew how hard I worked on my homework." "Well, we'll show Ray," said Mrs Jewls. She gave Beebe an A+. "There, I don't think he'll be trying that again." "Oh, thanks," said Beebe. "You may have a Tootsie Roll Pop too," said Mrs Jewls. Beebe took a Tootsie Roll Pop out of the coffee can on Mrs Jewls' desk, then returned to her seat. She proudly showed Calvin her A+. The next day, Mrs Jewls asked Damien to hand back another batch of homework. "How come Damien always gets to do everything?" griped Cathy. "I'm sorry, Cathy," said Mrs Jewls. "Would you like to pass back the homework?" "No," said Cathy. "I'm not your slave." Damien passed out the homework. Again, Beebe didn't get hers. Mrs Jewls called her over to the desk. On the back of the homework, somebody had written, "Mrs Jewls has a head full of oatmeal and it leaks out of her ears." "I didn't write it," said Beebe. "Ray?" asked Mrs Jewls. Beebe nodded. "Why don't you start checking the back of your homework?" suggested Mrs Jewls. "I did when I woke up," said Beebe. "He must have done it after breakfast while I was brushing my teeth. We had oatmeal for breakfast." She shook her head. "I won't brush my teeth anymore." "You have to brush your teeth," said Mrs Jewls. "My parents think he's such a little angel," Beebe complained. "He's always wrecking things, and then I'm always the one who gets into trouble." "Why can't you be more like Ray?" they say. Yesterday he threw all my underwear out of the window. Then my mother yelled at me for it. She wouldn't believe that her little darling son would do something like that. Mrs Jewls gave Bibi another A+ and another Tootsie Roll Pop. For Friday, everyone had to write a report and read it to the class. Bibi wrote her report about George Washington. She stood at the front of the class and read it out loud. George Washington never told a lie, not like Mrs Jewls. She tells lies all the time. That's why her nose is so big. She snores when she sleeps, so Mr Jewls has to wear earplugs. Everyone was laughing. Bibi stopped reading. What's so funny? She asked. Come here, said Mrs Jewls. Bibi shrugged and walked over to Mrs Jewls' desk. Mrs Jewls showed her what she'd just read. Did I just read that out loud? Bibi asked. Mrs Jewls nodded. I was just reading it, Bibi explained. I wasn't listening. It was Ray again, wasn't it? Asked Mrs Jewls. Oh, it had to be, said Bibi. Yesterday he put toothpaste in my socks and then my mum got mad at me for making a mess and wasting toothpaste. Bibi got an A+ on a report and another Tootsie Roll Pop. After school, Mrs Jewls called Bibi's mother on the phone. Hello, Mrs Gunn. This is Mrs Jewls from Wayside School. What's Bibi done now? Asked Mrs Gunn. Bibi hasn't done anything wrong, said Mrs Jewls. She's a wonderful girl. Well, that's a surprise, said Mrs Gunn. She's always causing trouble at home. I wanted to talk to you about that, said Mrs Jewls. I think you're being unfair to Bibi. I think she often gets into trouble when really Ray is to blame. Ray? Asked Mrs Gunn. Yes, I know you think he's a perfect angel, said Mrs Jewls, but sometimes children can be angels on the outside and devils underneath. That sounds like Bibi, said Mrs Gunn. I'm not talking about Bibi, I'm talking about Ray. Ray? Asked Bibi's mother. Who's Ray? Thank you.